Welcome to the Executive Forum Speaker Series from Purdue University's Daniels School of Business. I'm your host, Dave Randich, and I'm a lecturer here at the Daniels School, teaching undergrads on the West Lafayette campus. Executive Forum brings students and industry leaders together. Our speakers inspire our students and the public with insights on trends in their industry and guidance for students as they develop their business leadership skills. Today, we welcome to the Executive Forum Liane Hart, co-founder and CEO of Verility. Come along with us as we build the future of business. Liane, welcome to the Executive Forum.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
And today we have a real live entrepreneur, which is very cool. And we have someone from the agricultural sector of the economy, which we haven't had yet this semester. So we've got a couple new things to dive into.
Okay.
Liane, first of all, just tell us about the agricultural part of the economy and where you play.
Very good. I actually have my notes here. I normally wouldn't carry my phone with me in a presentation, but just to kind of give you a very high level and then to zoom into where I play, I thought would be beneficial. So the global agricultural industry is worth about $16 trillion. It's ranked about 6th in the list of industries. We are just below finance, retail, healthcare, construction, and technology, but we're bigger than energy, automotive and transit, as well as tourism. The global animal production part of that industry, so that's your meat, your live production, your eggs, your dairy, that's worth about $5 trillion. So it's a very big economy. Of that, beef is worth about $500 billion. So when you go out to eat a steak, that's what you're dabbling in. Pork and poultry is in that roughly $300 billion range. And then beneath there would be, your sheep and other animals. The global animal health pharmaceutical market, so veterinary and pharmaceutical market, which is again, down deeper into where I play and have had a lot of experience, is worth about $70 billion, a little over. And the breeding and reproduction part of that is about $5 billion. And then specifically the technology that we were able to bring forward into the market is associated with semen analysis and ovulation detection. And that's roughly worth about $2.2 billion globally. So that's kind of where I sit in my technology.
And what led you to sit there in the $2 billion segment?
So I actually was introduced to this technology after I left Elanco Animal Health, and I've always been in breeding. When I went to school here, I was in the School of Agriculture. I had my animal sciences degree. I stayed on for my master's program in specifically breeding and genetics, where I focused on quarter horse racing, which is kind of a little odd, but I put together a really nice committee to be able to do that, and I wanted to focus on heritability of peak performance in racing. And so I actually, when I left there, I started working for Elanco. I was trying to figure out a way to fuel that horse passion of mine. And I stayed with it and then focused on thoroughbred racing. So back then and even today, I think it was 2007 I started that. Even today, my husband and I continue to breed and race thoroughbreds. And so I understood the pains of that market, what it's like to not be able to get her bred, on time, losing cycles, potentially losing a full year with that animal, which is a lot of costs if you can imagine. And so when I left Elanco, literally weeks later, I was introduced to this technology, and they introduced it to me. It came from Brigham and Women's Hospital. So that's a division of Harvard Medical School. And they said that they had just validated this mobile, automated technology that looked at semen analysis. So they looked at motility, concentration, and morphology, so that they were able to have men be able to test their samples at home versus in clinic. And they said, is there any animal health application with that? And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely. We're either not looking at it at all, or we're looking under very old microscopes, or very, in a laboratory setting, $100,000 machines. There's nothing like this right now in the industry. And so I was very excited about that, and we formed a company. And basically, I just identified a pain that I was feeling, and then turned around, and ovulation detection came thereafter. That was an even bigger part of the reproduction equation in my eyes. And so that's where we're at right now, is bringing forward ovulation detection in livestock, specifically with this automated mobile device.
And Liane, a lot of students think about getting into entrepreneurship, and when's the right time to do that? Mm-hmm. Approximately how many years after your master's degree did you jump into this?
Yeah.
Approximate.
I'd say about 20 years.
And what's fascinating is it appears to me that this opportunity that you've seized upon was a mesh of you being in your domain and really understanding your industry, and then also building a network where opportunities were coming along. Can you tell us a little bit about networking and also immersing yourself in your industry?
Yeah, so when I was going through school, I worked for 17 years at Elanco. I was never thinking entrepreneurship. It wasn't until that very moment someone said, hey, what do you think of this technology, that it spurred from there. When I look at what corporate America was like for me, that is its own network, but there comes seatbelts and safety ties, if you will, with that. Albeit it is not always easy to work in corporate America. It actually is a very nourishing environment for learning, for gaining those experiences that you can then use if you do go into entrepreneurship, that you can leverage and understand before you even touch this open wide world of startups. So when I left corporate America and I started this company, I was like, I said this the other, where are my people? Like, who do I talk to? This is a totally different ecosystem. This is a totally, there's shared parts of networks. So I grew up in animal health and animal sciences. Some of the people are relatively the same, but a lot of them aren't. So you have to completely build a whole new network. And I had to figure out who the investors were, what stage of involvement they wanted to be, how much money did they want to invest in. I had to dive deep into making sure that the company was propped up in a way that was investor ready. So that just took a whole other network of people than what I actually had growing up. And so if I could give any piece of advice with that, is try to gain as much inertia, I think was the word that we talked about last night at the supper table, a much inertia, or what I've always coined building to outcomes, as you can before you start riding this roller coaster ride by yourself. If I could tell you anything, is go out there, get these experiences, learn from them, and then you will feel, I think, a lot more confident, going into a role like that. I hear a lot about students who maybe want to leave Purdue University or a university who want to be entrepreneurs, and I think that is absolutely wonderful and a great path. However, don't knock going into these bigger forums in order to learn from before you go out there and do something like that and run your own company. Now, certainly when I started the thoroughbred breeding and racing business, that was my kind of little foray, whether I knew it or not at the time, of like just starting a business, figuring out what P&L was, profit and loss statements, figuring out what it was like to manage that against my own personal income. And that was a nice little ride that I had before I went out to the startup world. So that would be what I would say about the network and learnings.
Yeah, and Liane, I get a lot of students that talk to me about their entrepreneurship plans, and I always ask them two questions, and we'll do those. So I'll start with the first one. What solution are we bringing to the consumer with your entrepreneurship idea? Specifically, what does a consumer need, and what's the economic justification for all this? So you touched on it. Can you go a little bit more into your solution and why it's important for consumers?
Yeah, so the pain point that I was feeling before I ever heard about this technology is that we are either, depending upon species, so if you look at cattle or you look at horses or you look at pork, sows and gilts, you're either using very, very expensive machines in order to time the right insemination, or what we call breeding, or you're using a completely subjective analysis. And so they're looking at behaviors, and that's not always, that can be very, quite variable. And so this technology actually drives to the right time to when to breed. And what does that do? That allows the producer to have more time to go do other things, to have less expenses towards that activity. And so it just makes their life easier. So if you're looking at what do I want to build a company off of, try to build it off of a pain point or to make somebody's life easier. And the best thing to do is to understand that pain point very fully. If I could really quickly just stretch on mine a little bit, I live in the middle of nowhere. And there aren't a lot of veterinarians out there today, especially in livestock. And so for me to call a veterinarian to come over and get an ultrasound machine, to ultrasound her ovaries, and to figure out when I need to drive her 3 hours down to Lexington to go get her bred, and then turn around and 3 hours back in the same day, and then to find out roughly 3 or 4 weeks later if she's bred, and oh my gosh, she's not, and I got to do this cycle all over again. That's not a lot of fun. And so that was my pain point I was dealing with.
So you discovered it yourself that way.
Yeah, very much so.
So the second question I always get is, where do I get a team? I've got this idea, I want to start up a company, where do I get this help?
Yeah.
And when you touched on, you built this network.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how your career evolves and you meet people and you can find people to help when it's time to start a company?
Yes. So when I worked in corporate, I knew at the time complementary teams and diverse teams in nature are really good, and they are. But I didn't really know that until I was in a startup. And we have, in Verility, we have a very complementary team. So we have a CFO that I knew when I was at Elanco. I wasn't best buds with him while at Elanco, but I knew of him. And the chief product officer, I didn't even know him until now, and I met him through my network. And he had worked at Roche Diagnostics, had help with hardware, software. Then you have the inventor, Hadi Shafee and his team from Harvard. And they know nothing about agriculture, finance, startups, but they knew about hardware and software. Excuse me. So we put together this team, and we are able to almost now finish each other's sentences. Excuse me. But when there's a solution is needed, so any one of us, we're constantly teaching each other our areas of expertise. I can't tell you how many times, as impatient as sometimes I am, I have said over and over what it's like to breed in these breeding barns. But you don't always get it on the first time, especially if it's not your area of expertise. So we do that for each other, and you have to have a lot of patience. So we meet as an executive leadership team every couple of weeks. Of course, we meet with each other one-on-one all the time. And it's like a constant classroom. But then all of a sudden, you have a downturn. Something bad happened. And let's say I have a roadblock, myself, I can't think of a solution forward. And we're talking about it as a team. I can't tell you how many times these people that know nothing about agriculture or breeding actually will come up with a solution that I would have never, ever thought of. And it's wonderful. And we do that for each other. That's when I learned that statement of being complementary on a team and diverse in nature is extremely, extremely important.
So let's jump back into the industry for a moment. We were talking about agriculture, which is fascinating to me just with the size. And then we dove into entrepreneurship. We're going to come back to that. But let's just talk about your industry. What types of things will we be seeing in the news? What type of trends? What's going on that is impacting your industry right now? And how do you react to that?
So I think a lot of us are always hearing about labor. It's happening in a lot of industries, but in agriculture, it's definitely a factor that we deal with. Certainly, at the skilled level, we have a lot of visa level folks. And then at other levels of these farms, they're coming up and they may be illegal, if you will. But they came in and the farmer's thinking they're legal because they have documentation that they're giving them. So they get hired. Well, that's we're dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of agriculture is moving towards AI and robotics in order to try to deal with that. So
we can't get labor, we can't
Yeah.
get workers, so we go to automation.
yeah, those kind of repetitive types of activities like manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same for these guys too, right? I mean, you're probably going to tell us about skilled positions
Yeah.
that are scarce as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. I told you about veterinarians. That's a very skilled area, and we're lacking. And I always equate it. I wish the veterinary classes across the United States at each of the vet schools were bigger, because I always used to say it's harder to get into vet school than med school, because the class size is just smaller. It's just the way it is. And so, so skilled labor is even difficult as well.
And I think it's interesting for students to know this, because we see all the news now, all the layoffs, and everybody's cutting out 10% of the workforce and AI and all that. But at the same time, you talk to CEOs, entrepreneurs, and they're going to say, I can't find the right people, or I have the right people and I'm so grateful.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I would say also another thing that's obviously has been in the news would be the tariffs.
Yeah.
But you can see how that changes overnight. We were just talking, everybody's like, who's going to buy the soybeans? And a lot of the soybean farmers are paying $4 corn, which was the price of corn in the late 70s, early 80s. But the input costs are a lot higher than back then. So their margins are really, really difficult to deal with. But then, what in the last 48 hours, President Trump went and visited with Xi, and it's all taken care of, so to speak. He's buying a lot of beans now, and he's contracted to do so over the next 2 to 3 years. He had even gotten, I believe, Thailand and Vietnam on board with buying beans. So, that's stuff you have to deal with. That's that cyclical stuff that you deal with in agriculture and that you deal with in manufacturing supply. They were dealing with it there as well. So you have to learn to navigate when the stakes are really high, but the margins are low. That's really difficult to do. We do that a lot in the startup world. The stakes are always high in startup. I'm constantly living milestone to milestone. Every milestone is a live or die death for me. In other words, there's a milestone, let's say, that I dealt with over this last fall and winter, where we were validating our technology. And if that didn't happen, I don't know what was going to happen with the company. But it happened, thank goodness. And so we were able to kind of keep moving forward. So that's the ebbs and flows of the startup life. It's not always easy. You have to have thick skin. And so that's, I think with the parents that I have, that was what I was born for.
So let's get into this, the whole nature of being an entrepreneur. And you mentioned to me the pace and the speed. And so you worked at Elanco, which used to be part of Eli Lilly, and we talked about how they have a great new product funnel, and everybody's working on developing these products to get them out there at the appropriate time on the calendar. Startup world's a little different.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a lot different. You don't have near as much money or near as much time, but you have all the more delivery. Elanco, other, top animal health strategics, they have their stakeholders that they have to deliver to, and we have ours as well. They're mainly investors. And if we don't, they typically require a quick ROI. And there's not as much leniency necessarily in the startup life. So that's why I kind of say it's a live or die type of way to operate.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about we talked about you got to go fast in a startup, but in certain sectors of the economy, certain industries, adoption rates are fairly low. So for example, in tech, we have fast adoption. Somebody comes up with a new app and you load it and you push out updates.
Yes.
adoption a little more slowly in agriculture. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that was biggest learning that I think a lot of investors have had in the last 5 to 8 years. It was kind of fun to invest in ag tech over these last few years. But when you look at how the psychology is of that customer, they typically are slower to adopt. There's always, in any given industry, the early adopters and the late adopters and everyone in between. But the timelines can be different on how quickly that runs through its course. And farmers, producers, animal producers, they can be very skeptical. They have very tight margins. It's a commodity market. And so to interrupt their business, because this is a B2B, this is business to business, to interrupt their business and put them at risk is very difficult to do, and you better have the trust of them in order to be able to even walk through the door on their farm. And so you have to have something that they think is a need on their farm, number one, that's been proven, that you're gonna have to prove again. So they're not just going to say, I will buy it, thanks for the advertisement. They're like, all right, prove it to me, because every farm is different. So we know that we have to go to all these farms and do what we call customer demo trials. And that's what we're doing right now.
And you mentioned thick skin. Why does an entrepreneur have to have thick skin? And maybe you have an example.
So you get a lot of no's when you're asking for funding. You get a lot of no's. I can't tell you how many no's you get, but always remember that too. That one yes can fuel you for a year. It can fuel you for 2 years. You know, it just depends on where you're at in the phase of your development of your technology or where you're at in scaling. Certainly, if there's adoption and revenues, you get more money. Certainly, earlier in the stage, you may get less, but you may get less money from more people because they are, very interested in whatever it is that you're trying to do. The other reason you have to have thick skin is because lots of things happen across, along the timeline of developing a product. There's lots of things that happen where it doesn't work. There's a lot of variables that you learn from that you have to fix in order for that variable not to be a problem anymore. But when it happens, you think you've fallen off the tracks. So you have to be able to be kind of even-keeled through all that. That was a big learning that I have had to have. I was pretty even-keeled in corporate America. But when you feel like the stakes are that high, your money is in, you've got skin in the game. You've got sweat equity in the game. You've got your own team riding on you and each other. You've got investors knocking on the door. What are you doing? What happened? What's wrong? You've got to have a very even keel and thick skin and take things in stride and work very creatively for solutions and not give up. The name of the game for this is perseverance. I can't stress that enough.
And before you hear no, you've got to get in the door.
Yeah.
And you told me a very interesting story about getting on the backstretch. Here you are, you're an accomplished person in business, a long career, multiple degrees. You and your family have a thoroughbred business, but you wanted to get into the thoroughbred inner circle.
Yeah.
And tell us about how you got in the door there and what that takes.
Oh, that was fun. So I had, in the thoroughbred business, the racing business, the best way to meet people is at the racetrack. But the only way you can go on the backstretch is if you have a license. And the only way you have a license is if somebody from the backstretch signs you up to get a license. So you have to know people back there to even get through the gate. So I was like, how do I do this? Because I did not know anyone from the industry. We did not come from racing. We were not what we call blue bloods. And so I wanted to get in it. And so I started, and this would be after hours when I would be done working on Elanco or on the week. I started going to these, what we call horseman meetings. And they'd be like once a month. And I would actually go and sit there and just watch people talk and figure out who everyone was and what they were doing. Were they trainers? Were they groomsmen? Like what did they do, veterinarians? And I'd watch, and I'd try to find the nicest person in the room that was a trainer, because that's where I wanted to learn. And this one guy who I thought was super nice, I went up to him and I said, I would really like to learn more about, racing. Here's who I am. I'd be willing to work for you for free in order to get this education. And he allowed me to come through the backstretch. He signed me in, and I would work for him every Saturday and Sunday morning, and then after hours during the week when we were racing. And I would work for free just to learn. Because I thought, why are you paying me? I mean, I'm here, I'm trying, you've got such an education to give me. I mean, I was just happy to be there. I was just excited to be there. Mm-hmm. So I did that for a number of years and then really built a network there. Mm-hmm. And that's how I built my name. So I wanted a certain brand, mm-hmm. For myself. And I wanted to show that I was willing to learn from everyone and anyone and work hard, and that I wasn't there just on a whim. Mm-hmm. I meant what I said, and I was there for business, if you will.
And so along that vein, Liane, we have a bunch of students here who are going to be graduating soon. What kind of advice have you got for them as they enter the workforce in their 20s?
Be open. So some of the things that I've been hearing as I talk to students over the last few years is, whether it be right before they come into college or after they come, as they're graduating from college, I hear an unwillingness to kind of go through different adventures or pathways because they just don't know what's on the other side. It's a very gray area. You're swimming in mud. I use that term a lot myself. I encourage you to swim in mud. I really do. That's where you're going to learn. It's scary, but that's where you're going to learn. When I was at Elanco, they had asked me to do a role in regulatory, and I was like, no way. That was a big black hole for me in the company. Like, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. FDA, no. I was animal science, veterinary medicine, whatever. And, but when I did, that opened up a whole new world. And I knew about FDA, USDA, EPA. I could understand where the guardrails were. I could be more creative. And that helped me in my life today in the startup world. I met a girl literally a couple weeks ago. She was thinking about going into college. And she was telling me, she wanted to be in animal sciences. She was telling me about she wanted to judge cattle. Well, for some of you that don't know what that life is about, it can be very lucrative to be a judge for cattle all over the United States. But she said, I don't think I want to go to school yet because I don't know exactly what I want to do yet. And I said, nobody ever does. You just don't realize that a lot of times when you walk through this door, that there's like 20 other doors behind that door, and you don't realize those doors are even there until you walk through that first door. So I remember walking up and down the halls when Animal Sciences was at Lilly Life Health Sciences over here. And we would have a corkboard at the end of the hallway showing what all the most recent jobs were for graduates to take. And I'd walk and I'd look at that corkboard. I'm like, that doesn't look like me. That doesn't look like me. I don't know about that, whatever. And wow, it's just amazing when you actually just say, I'm just going to take a step. Just take a step. And, you can always divert, go further, there's lots of things. Don't be afraid to swim in mud. That would be my...
Just keep moving forward.
Just move forward. Yeah. And I told that student, I said, don't take a bye year because you're afraid to swim in mud. Just go out, and because school just opens so many, it starts to build your network. You start to realize these entities that you think you knew, there's so much more to it. And that, just by going through that door, that guides you to what's next. When I came to school here, I had no idea I was going to be good at breeding and genetics. I had no idea. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew I wanted to be and do with animals. I wanted to, be in this industry. I didn't know how. I didn't know how I was going to make money, but I just know I needed to step my foot and do it. And that's what I did.
And that Purdue diploma is a passport to the world, isn't it?
Yes. Oh my. It was definitely a passport to my world. That's for sure.
Okay, Liane, congratulations on your startup success with Verility, and on behalf of Purdue University, the Daniel School of Business, and the Executive Forum, thank you. This was terrific.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Executive Forum Speaker Series. Learn how the Daniel School is building the future of business by visiting us at business.purdue.edu. That's business.purdue.edu.